Her husband abandoned her at the door of the hospital during labor. But here's what you need to understand before this story goes any further. He didn't panic. He didn't freeze under pressure. He didn't have a moment of weakness on the worst day of their lives. He just finally did it in public. Everything he had been doing behind closed doors, every cold shoulder, every cruel word, every time he made her feel like she was asking for too much just by existing. He just did the final version of it at a hospital entrance in the middle of the afternoon and drove away. To another woman. She didn't cry when he left. She didn't call his name. She didn't even look surprised. She just reached for the wall. And that said everything. She slid down that concrete wall, back against it, hands flat on the ground, her body doing the one thing that wasn't going to wait for any of this to get better. And she stayed there. Because there was nowhere else to go and no one coming. The staff inside could see her through the glass. Not one of them came out. And the man walking into that hospital at that exact moment, the man carrying a contract to shut that entire building down by end of day, he saw her and he stopped. He told himself it wasn't his problem. Then she looked up. She didn't know who he was. She just saw the only person who hadn't looked away yet. She looked up at a complete stranger and said the one word she had left. Please. He came to close the hospital. He had no idea he was about to meet the woman who would close the door on everything he thought he was. If this story is already hitting you, stay with me. Because it gets deeper than you think. And if you know someone who has ever been left alone when they needed someone the most, a friend, a sister, someone in your family, share this with them right now. This one is for them. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Every week, I bring you stories that remind you what people are actually capable of when everything is on the line. Now let's get into it. His name was Elias Thorne, and when he walked through those hospital doors that afternoon, he was not a hero. He was not a good man looking for a cause. He was a man with a job to do, and that job was to shut this place down. He did it 4 times before. Different hospitals, different cities, same result. He walked in, signed the papers, shook the necessary hands, and by the time the sun went down, 300 people were updating their resumes. He was good at it. He felt nothing doing it, but he couldn't get past the lobby. Because he brought Sarah inside himself, one arm around her, her weight against his shoulder. Through the doors the staff still hadn't opened from the inside. He settled her into a waiting room chair. She gripped the armrest with both hands, just trying to get through the next 60 seconds. The administrator appeared at his elbow. Contracts ready, voice low. Mr. Thorne, if we could just step into the office. Elias looked at Sarah. No hospital bag, no overnight bag, nothing at all. Not because she forgot. Because a man spent years making sure she never had anything ready, never had anything waiting, never had a plan that didn't go through him first. He looked back at the administrator. Nobody is stepping anywhere. The pen was still in his hand. The papers were still unsigned. And for the first time in his career, Elias Thorne genuinely did not know what he was going to do next. But what happened when he finally asked for her to be admitted? What the staff said back to him stopped him cold. I need her admitted, right now. The charge nurse didn't flinch. She pulled up the screen and explained, in the calm, tired voice of someone who said this 1,000 times, that without insurance verification, the system could not process the admission. No deposit confirmation, no intake. Those were the rules. Elias told her he would cover it personally. She shook her head. It wasn't about money. It was the protocol. The acquisition transition terms required verification before any new admissions during the changeover period. Show me the clause, Elias said. She turned the screen toward him. He read 4 lines and stopped. He knew that language, every word of it. His legal team drafted those terms in a midtown conference room 3 weeks ago. He approved it in 30 seconds without looking up from his phone. It seemed like a sensible administrative measure at the time. Clean up the intake process, reduce liability exposure. He looked across the lobby at Sarah. She wasn't watching him. She stared at the floor, breathing through a contraction, completely alone inside whatever her body was doing. No one held her hand. No one timed anything. She did it the way she clearly learned to do most things, quietly, without asking for help, because asking stopped feeling worth it a long time ago. The thing blocking her from a bed and a doctor was not bureaucracy. It was him. His words. His approval. His 30-second decision on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks ago. He stood very still in the middle of that lobby. Then he made a phone call that changed everything. But what he said on that call was only the beginning of how far he was willing to go. 4 sentences. That was all it took. Close the acquisition now. Not at 5. Right now. I will take every legal exposure personally. He hung up. He turned around. The lobby watched him. Nurses, orderlies, the administrator, a janitor who stopped pretending to push his cart. Nobody spoke. Elias didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. She is being admitted. Anyone who needs a reason. I own this building as of 60 seconds ago. Move. The lobby moved, and as they brought the wheelchair and began moving Sarah toward the maternity ward, Elias walking alongside because no one told him not to, and he wasn't leaving, he noticed something. The way she flinched when the male orderly reached for her arm without warning. The way she pulled her sleeve down over her wrist before anyone could see anything. The way she said thank you in the voice of a woman who learned to be grateful for things that should have been given freely. Elias said nothing. He just kept walking. But something shifted in him. Something old and heavy he spent 30 years building walls around. Because he recognized what he saw. Not from a textbook. Not from a report. From a childhood spent watching his mother move through a house the exact same way. Quietly. Carefully. Making herself small so nothing would start. He spent 30 years running from that memory. And somehow he walked straight back into the middle of it on a Tuesday afternoon in a hospital he came to destroy. But nothing could have prepared him for what waited around the corner of that hallway. He almost walked past it. Just another corridor. Just another turn. But something made him slow down before his mind caught up with why. The old pediatric waiting area. Same hard orange plastic chairs. Same fluorescent hum underneath the afternoon light pressing through the window. Same feeling. That specific, unmistakable feeling of a room built for waiting and nothing else. He was 7 years old the last time he sat in a room like this. It was a Tuesday, just like today. His father drove him here after the accident, walked him to the waiting room, told him to sit and wait, and disappeared. He sat. He waited. The sun moved across the floor the way it does when hours pass and nobody comes. He watched it move. He counted the chairs. He read the same notice on the wall 4 times. He told himself his father was coming back every 30 minutes for 11 hours. Nobody came. A night nurse spotted him at 9 o'clock, still in the same chair. She called child services. And Elias Thorne learned, in that orange plastic chair on that Tuesday afternoon, that the only person you could ever truly count on was yourself. So he became someone who needed no one, someone who held the pen, someone who controlled every exit so no exit could ever be used on him again. 30 years of that. 30 years of buildings and balance sheets and never once sitting in a waiting room for anyone. Sarah's hand found his wrist in the grip of a contraction. Sudden. No warning. Her fingers locked around him like she needed something solid and he was the only solid thing nearby. He looked down at her hand on his wrist. He didn't pull away. He pushed the wheelchair forward, and somewhere deep inside the man he made himself, something that sealed shut 30 years ago, quietly opened. Stay with me. Because what is coming next is the moment this story stops being about a hospital and starts being about every person who was ever made to feel like they were too much trouble to stay for. If this is reaching something in you right now, share it. Text it to someone. You never know who is sitting somewhere right now and needed this today more than you know. Don't go anywhere. The husband is about to come back. He came back. Of course he did. Not with remorse, not with his heart in his hands. He came back the way men like him always come back, with a story already built and a hand already extended, and the quiet confidence of someone who always talked his way back into rooms he had no right to re-enter. His name was Marcus. Someone texted him that Elias Thorne was inside that hospital. So Marcus did the arithmetic in a parking lot 4 blocks away and drove back. He walked in from the afternoon sun, adjusting his collar. Elias stepped into the corridor before Marcus could get anywhere near the maternity ward. They stood face to face. Marcus started talking. Pressure. Fear. The debt. He said the other woman meant nothing. He just needed a moment to think, and he panicked, and he was sorry, and he just wanted to see Sarah and the baby. Stop. One word. Marcus stopped. I spent 1 hour with your wife, Elias said quietly. 1 hour. And I can see everything you did to her without her saying a single word to me. The way she moves, the way she says thank you, the way she didn't even look surprised when you drove away. Marcus opened his mouth. She will never need you for one single thing ever again. Not one thing. And if you come near that ward, if you come near her or that child, I will make sure every door in this city closes in your face permanently. Marcus left. Elias stood in the corridor alone. His hands were steady. His voice never rose once, but something shook inside him. Not anger at Marcus, but recognition. He knew what Sarah lived through, because someone lived through it for him, and he never once went back to help her either. The nurse found him in the corridor. He saw it in her face before she opened her mouth, that expression people wear when the news is bad and the timing is worse. Dr. Renata Voss was gone. She resigned that morning. 9 years in this hospital. The best obstetric surgeon on the staff. She cleared her desk at noon, hugged the nurses she worked with for nearly a decade, and drove away. She refused to watch the place she loved get hollowed out. She put 40 minutes between herself and that building, and Sarah's delivery was becoming complicated in ways that needed her specifically. Elias asked for her number. He called. She didn't answer. He called again. She picked up. He didn't negotiate, didn't offer a number, didn't tell her the hospital changed or that everything was different now. He just told her the truth, all of it. The contract, the clause he approved without reading, the woman on the ground, the husband who left, the sleeve pulled down over the wrist, the orange plastic chairs, the Tuesday afternoon when he was 7 years old and nobody came. He told her everything. Then he said, I am not asking as your employer. I am asking as someone who knows exactly what it means to be left in a hospital with nobody coming. There is a woman here who deserves better than everything she has been given, and right now you are the only person who can give it to her. The line stayed silent for a long time. Then he heard it, a turn signal. She drove back. But when she walked through those doors and saw what was happening in that delivery room, Elias faced the hardest moment of the entire day. The monitor alarmed at 4:47 in the afternoon. Dr. Voss assessed Sarah in 30 seconds and turned to the nurse with a look that needed no translation. They needed the fetal monitor, the specific one, the one that tracked what was happening with the accuracy they needed to make the next decision safely. The nurse went pale. Elias ordered it moved that morning as part of the liquidation inventory. It sat on the loading dock 3 floors down, tagged for resale. His order. His authorization code. His handwriting on the manifest. Elias was already on the phone before she finished the sentence. He tore the manifest in half, called the dock manager directly, overrode the hold with his personal code. 4 minutes later, 3 people moved that equipment to the elevator. It was in the room in 9 minutes. Dr. Voss didn't thank him. She just worked. Elias walked back into the corridor and sat down against the wall. The afternoon light fell gold now, long and slanted through the window the way it gets when the day runs out of time. He sat with his back against the wall and his hands on his knees, the way a 7-year-old boy sits in a waiting room. Except this time, he didn't wait for someone to come for him. He waited for someone else. On the other side of that door, something happened that no amount of money or authority or carefully held control could touch. He sat in the gold light, and he waited. The baby cried at 5:22 in the afternoon. Small, thin, new, completely sure of itself. The sound of something that arrived and carried absolutely no apology for it. The corridor went quiet around it. Elias didn't move for a moment. He just sat there and let it land, that sound, in whatever part of him stayed hollow for the longest time. Dr. Voss opened the door. She looked at him, this man she turned her car around for, this stranger who broke the thing she loved and spent one afternoon trying to put it back together, and she nodded once. He stood up. Through the window he saw Sarah. The last of the afternoon light fell low and gold across the bed, across her hands, across the small new face pressed against her chest. She cried. The baby cried. And somehow together it sounded nothing like crying. It sounded like the first conversation between two people who always knew each other and finally sat in the same room. Sarah looked up. She found him through the glass the way you find someone you never expected and somehow already know. She didn't speak, but her eyes said the thing that words would only make smaller. You stayed. Elias stood at that window a long time, long enough to understand something he ran from for 30 years, that the exit he spent his whole life controlling was never freedom. It was just a longer way of being alone. 1 week later, the afternoon light through the chairman's office window carried the same quality as that day. Honest, direct. The kind that shows everything clearly and hides absolutely nothing. He fed the liquidation plan into the shredder. He fed the resale manifests in after it. He fed the acquisition transition terms in last. The ones with his clause, his language, the words that almost left a woman in active labor sitting on concrete outside a hospital that was supposed to save people. Gone. On the desk in front of him sat 2 documents. The first, the street, Jude's no refusal maternity initiative. Any woman in active labor admitted immediately. No verification, no deposit, no documentation required, no exceptions. Elias funded it personally for the next 20 years. The second, a private legal arrangement. He cleared Sarah's medical bills entirely. He established a housing fund in her name. He retained a family attorney permanently to make sure the man who left her at that wall never held legal or financial power over her or her child again. Not one day. Not $1. Never. He signed both with the same pen he brought to kill the building. On the corner of the desk, not framed, just sitting in the afternoon light where he could see it from his chair, a photograph. A day shift nurse took it on her phone. Sarah in the bed, the baby against her chest. Elias standing slightly to the side with the expression of a man who just understood something about himself that 30 years of wealth and walls never taught him. He left it in the light. He didn't need to frame it. Some things you don't put behind glass. You just let them stay where they can reach you. Sarah didn't just get a healthy baby that afternoon. She took her life back. And Elias didn't just save a hospital. He finally, after 30 years, stopped running from himself. Some people come into our lives as strangers and leave as the reason everything changed. And sometimes the person who saves you is the last person either of you expected. If this story moved you, if it reached something in you today, share it right now. Send it to a friend. Send it to your sister. Send it to anyone in your life who has ever been left alone when they needed someone the most. They need to hear this today. And if you are new here, subscribe. Every single week I bring you stories like this one. Stories about real humanity. About what people do when everything is on the line and the easiest thing in the world would be to walk away. Because the world needs more people who stay. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. That means more than you know.